The car came up our lane at 5 o'clock in the morning, and in a place where there are no cars, that sound is the same as a scream. I was 14. I was standing at the kitchen window in my nightgown, with my hair still down my back, and I watched my older brother walk out of our house carrying one canvas bag my mother had packed, while I was sleeping. He did not turn around. My father stood on the porch with his hands hanging at his sides, and he did not touch him. Not his shoulder, not his head, nothing. The car door closed. The engine went back down the lane and out onto the road, and the sound of it got smaller and smaller until the only things left were our rooster and the wind in the corn. My father came inside. He hung his hat on the peg. He sat down at the table, and we ate breakfast. My mother went to the cupboard the way she did every morning of her life, and I watched her hand stop over the 7th plate. She put it back on the shelf and said, "Set the table for 6. 5 words. That was the whole explanation, and it closed a door that stayed closed for 66 years. Before I tell you what was inside the envelope my father left behind, and why I did not open it for 23 years, let me tell you who I am. My name is Anna. I am 80 years old. I was born in 1946 and raised Old Order Amish in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, in a house with no telephone, no electricity, and no photograph of a single person I have ever loved. This is Hannah, the Amish girl, the channel where women from my world finally say out loud what we spent our whole lives swallowing. If you want to hear what that world was actually like from the people who lived inside it, please subscribe and tap the like button. And in the comments, tell me one thing. Is there a name in your family that stopped being said? You do not have to explain it. Just tell me if there is. I read every comment. I am slow, but I get to all of them. Now stay with me, because I have to warn you about something. This is not a story about a cruel man. I know that is what you are expecting. I expected it too, for most of my life. What I found inside that envelope was much harder to carry than cruelty. And if you grew up anywhere near a family that kept secrets it believed were kindnesses, this one is going to sit in your chest for a while. Let me explain the world this happened in, because it is not the one you are sitting in. I finished school at 13 in a one-room schoolhouse with a wood stove and 41 children in 8 grades. 8th grade was the end. No discussion, no question of more. When I was a girl, Amish fathers in some states were still being taken to the county jail for refusing to send their children on to high school. Everything in our lives was governed by the Ordnung, the unwritten rules of our church district, never written down anywhere, which is exactly what made it so total. Dress width, hat brim, buggy style, whether your barn could have a certain kind of hinge. And underneath all of it, 2 words that shaped every day. Gelassenheit, which means yielding, letting go of your own will, and Demet, which means humility, the opposite of standing out. Church was every other Sunday in a home on hard benches carried house to house in a bench wagon. 4 hours, men on one side, women on the other. We sang out of the Auspun, the oldest hymn book still in use anywhere in the world, written by prisoners. The second hymn was always Das Loblied, so slow that a child could fall asleep between the beginning and the end of one word. And then there was the Bun, Meidung, shunning. People think it is a door slamming shut. It is not. It is quieter and much worse. If you are baptized and then you leave, you are not thrown out into the dark. You are kept nearby, in view, and simply not touched. Your mother will not eat at the same table as you. Your brother will not take a tool directly from your hand. You come to the funerals and stand in the back. You are made into a warning that people are still fond of. And here is the part that matters most for what I am about to tell you. That only applies if you were baptized first. Baptism in our world came around 18, 19, 20. It was not done to you as a baby. You knelt in front of the bishop of your own free will, and you promised. And the moment you said yes, that promise had teeth for the rest of your life. Before it, you were only a child of the church, not a member. If a boy walked away before he knelt, there was grief, there was shame, there was a whole district whispering, but there was no ban, not officially. The door stayed open behind him. Hold on to that. At 14, I did not understand it. It took me until I was 75. My brother's name was Amos. He was 3 years older, and he was the only person in that house who ever asked me what I thought about anything. He was good with his hands and terrible at sitting still. He kept a paper bag under his mattress, and I knew what was in it, because I am a little sister and that is my job. Books from the town library, a road map of Ohio folded and refolded until it was soft as cloth. He asked our father questions at supper that made the whole table go quiet, and our father would set down his fork and wait, and then go on eating without answering. And then one morning in October of 1960, a hired English driver came up our lane at 5 o'clock, and my brother got into that car, and I never saw him again. Here is what nobody outside our world understands about a disappearance like that. We had no photographs. It is a small detail, and it is the cruelest thing in this whole story. Photographs were vanity, graven images, which means when a person goes, you do not have their face. You have nothing. I spent 66 years trying to hold my brother's face in my mind, and I lost it slowly, the way you lose a word. By the time I was 30, all I had left was his hands and his laugh and the way he tipped his hat back with one finger when he was about to say something he should not. His straw hat stayed on the peg by the door for 11 days. I counted. Then one morning it was gone. Nobody took it down in front of anybody, and nobody ever mentioned it. That was the rule. Not a spoken rule, a rule made entirely of silence. We did not say his name at the table. We did not say it at Christmas. When a stranger at a wedding asked my mother how many children she had, I heard her say 6, and then she looked at her plate for the rest of the meal. I asked once, only once. I was 15, helping my father in the shop, and I said, "Where is Amos?" And my father set down the piece he was working on and looked past me out the window for a long time. And then he said, "That is not for you." And he picked the piece back up. I am not going to sugarcoat this next part. I built my whole life on top of an answer I invented myself. Because when nobody tells you why, you do not stop wondering. You start writing the story yourself. And the story I wrote was that my brother had done something shameful, and my father had thrown him out. And my father was a hard man who could put a child in a car and then hang up his hat and eat breakfast. I loved my father. I also thought that about him for 66 years. And I could never make those two things stop scraping against each other. For a long time, I believed we were the only family this had happened to. At a funeral in 1988, I found out we were not. Her name was Fanny. I had known her since we were girls, and we had never once talked about anything that mattered. We were washing dishes in a stranger's kitchen after the burial, and she said without looking up, "We had one too." I said, "One what?" She dried a plate and said, "A brother who went, nobody ever said." Then she handed me the plate, and we went on washing. That was the entire conversation. That was as far as either of us could go. But I rode home that night and did the arithmetic, and I could count 4 families in our district alone, and once I started counting, I could not stop. Different men, different years, and every family had the same explanation, which was no explanation at all. That is when I understood this was not my father's peculiar hardness. This was a system running as designed. The silence was not a failure of the system. The silence was the system. My father died in February of 1998, in the front room, with the whole family there and the snow coming down. 2 days after the funeral, my sister Lydia brought me an envelope. It had been in the bottom drawer of the workbench in his shop, under a flour sack. My name was on the front, in pencil, in his handwriting, slanting uphill the way it always did. It said, "Anna, when you are ready." I have never been able to explain what I did next, including to myself. I took that envelope home. I put it in the nightstand drawer on my side of the bed, and I did not open it. Not that year, not the next. My husband died. My children married. My niece went. That envelope sat in that drawer through 23 years of my life, and I dusted around it, and I moved it once when we changed the furniture, and I never opened it. People ask me why, and I will tell you the truth. I was afraid it would say what I already believed. I was afraid I would learn my brother had done something unforgivable, and then the story I had carried would harden into fact, and there would be no getting out of it. As long as it stayed shut, there was still a chance I was wrong. Not knowing was a kind of hope. That is the saddest sentence I know. I opened it when I was 75 years old. It was not bravery. I had broken my hip that spring, and when you are 75 and you break something, you start putting your house in order. I was going through drawers, deciding what my daughters would have to throw out. There is a dress folded in the bottom of my closet that I have kept for 27 years. It is not mine, and I am not going to tell you about it today. Underneath it was my father's handwriting. I sat down on the floor of my own bedroom and I opened it with my thumb. 4 pages. My father was not a man of many words out loud. On paper, he was someone else. He wrote that Amos was to be baptized on the 4th Sunday of that October. He had been going to the instruction class. He had already knelt once. And in the 2nd week of September, my father went out to the shop looking for a chisel and found the paper bag from under the mattress moved into the workbench drawer, the library books, the map, and a letter from a man in Ohio offering my brother work in a furniture shop after the 1st of the year. My father wrote that he sat down on his own shop floor and stayed there until it got dark, because he knew his son. He wrote, "I knew he would not stay, not at 19, not at 29. He would go, and if he went after he knelt, he would go under the ban, and there would be no road back for him as long as he lived. His mother could not eat at a table with him. He would come to my funeral and stand at the back like a stranger." So my father made his decision alone and never told one living person. He sold a horse. He hired an English driver. He put his 17-year-old son in a car 3 weeks before his baptism, so the promise would never come out of his mouth, so the ban could never touch him, so my brother could walk out of that world a free man instead of a shunned one. And he let the whole church believe his son had shamed him, and he let his wife believe it, and he let me believe it, and he carried that for 38 years. He wrote why. One line, and I have it memorized. If I had told, they would have known I helped him, and the helping would have been undone, and there would have been discipline on this house, and your mother would have gone after him and brought him back to a life he could not live. So I said nothing. I have said nothing so long that I no longer know how to start. There was more. Amos wrote to him. Once a year, every year, general delivery to a post office 9 miles away in Gap, where a man my father knew held the letters. My father collected them on his way back from the mill. 31 letters over 31 years. He never answered one, not once, because answering was contact, and contact would have undone everything he had spent. He kept every letter in that flour sack in the bottom drawer of his workbench, under my envelope, in the same drawer, 2 feet from where I had stood at 15 years old and asked him where my brother was. And on the last page, in pencil, my father had written a list. The first part was dates, 31 of them in a column, the day each letter came. He had been counting. This man, who never in his life said a soft word out loud, had sat in a shop and counted the days between letters from a son he could not answer. Underneath the dates were names. I did not know any of them. A woman's name, then 5 more indented under hers, then a longer list under those. It was my brother's wife, his children, his grandchildren. And the 4th name on that second list was Anna. He named a daughter after me, after a sister he last saw through a kitchen window when she was 14 years old with her hair down. I sat on the floor of a bedroom in a house my husband built, at 75 years old, with both hands over my mouth so I would not make a sound, in an empty house where there was nobody left to hear me anyway. What happened over the next 11 Sundays I cannot carry in 20 minutes. There are things this recording cannot hold. The names, the counting, the drawer, the dress I kept for 27 years. 3 years ago, I wrote all of it down. The book is called The Sundays. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. What I have come to understand since then is bigger than my family. There is a woman named Ruth who runs a grief group at the library in town. I started going after I left because I did not know what else to do with myself on a Sunday. I told her this whole story one afternoon, in a plastic chair with a cup of coffee I never drank. When I finished, she said something I have thought about every day since. She said, "Grief has a shape. Grief you are never allowed to name has no shape at all. That is why it never ends." 66 years. That is how long I grieved a man I was not permitted to mention. I was never allowed to say I missed him, so I never said it. So it never became a thing that could be finished. It stayed in me the way water stays in a cellar. And all those years, the answer sat 2 feet away, in a workbench drawer, in a flour sack, in the handwriting of a man who loved us both so much that he made himself the villain of the story on purpose. Now let me be completely honest with you about my father, because you are waiting for me to be angry at him. I am not. I was for about 4 days. Then it went somewhere else. My father was not a cruel man. He was a man handed exactly one tool, and the tool was silence, and he used it the only way he knew how, which was to protect his son with it. He had no one to ask. No bishop, because the bishop was the danger. No brother, because a told thing travels. No counselor, no book, no telephone, no anything. He was a man in a shop with a chisel and a decision, and he made it alone, and he was right. And it cost him 38 years of being thought hard by everyone he loved. That is not a monster. That is a man doing the most loving thing available to him inside a system that gave him nothing better. That is the part I want you to sit with. The people were not the problem. My mother, counting 6 children out loud when she had 7, was not the problem. The problem was a world where the only way to protect a child was to lie about him for the rest of your life, where a family could be split down the middle for 66 years, and every person involved would call it obedience. I left when I was 76 years old, 1 year after I opened the envelope. I know how that sounds. My daughters thought I had lost my mind, an old woman with a bad hip walking out of the only world she has ever known. But I could not sit through another 4-hour service on a hard bench, singing that second hymn slow, knowing what I knew, and pretending with my face that nothing had changed. It cost me what it costs everybody. I stand at the back at the funerals now. My sister Lydia writes twice a year and will not sit at my table. There are grandchildren who are polite to me the way you are polite to a woman from church you cannot quite place. They are doing what they were taught, the same as I did. The Amish world gave me things I will carry into the ground. A work ethic that held me up through every hard season of my life. A community that showed up before you knew you needed them, with food and hands and no questions. Faith that is complicated now and wounded and still real. But there is no scripture that requires a family to pretend a son was never born. There is no commandment that a father must be thought cruel by his own daughter for 38 years in order to be good. And there is no God I believe in now. Who would look at a man counting letters alone in a dark shop and call that holy? If you grew up in a house where the important things were the things nobody said, I see you. If there is a name in your family that everybody knows and nobody speaks, hear this from an 80-year-old woman who waited too long. The envelope in your drawer is not going to get easier. Not knowing is not hope. It only feels like it. You are allowed to ask, out loud, in a room, with your own voice. You are allowed to be the one who breaks the silence, even if you are the oldest one left, even if everyone who could have answered you is gone. Tell me in the comments what part of this stayed with you. Tell me about your own drawer if you are ready. And if you want more from behind the prayer cap, subscribe to Hannah the Amish Girl. There is so much I have not said, and I do not have another 66 years to say it in. The Sundays, what 20 minutes cannot hold. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. The morning is yours, if you decide it is.